Yeah, back to reality.
Back to reality now.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the November 6th regular meeting of the Everett Public Schools Board of Directors. Will you please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Although we recite the Pledge of Allegiance each week at our each regular board meeting, it seems more relevant tonight as it is election night as well, to have that freedom to vote. Next, we will call the roll. Will the secretary please call?
President Mason?
Present.
Vice President Andrews?
Present.
Director Lassane?
Present.
Director Mitchell?
Present.
Director Nankar?
Present.
Student Representative Pollock?
Present.
Student Representative Tran?
Thank you. Our first item of business this evening is the adoption of the agenda. And now I say this evening because it's dark out after the time change. I usually say this afternoon, or 2 weeks ago I said this afternoon. Dr. Coma, you please introduce tonight's agenda.
Certainly. Consistent with the plans established at your 2018 Summer Planning Workshop, tonight's agenda contains several elements related to both the district's strategic plan and the board's annual goals. There is a segment this evening for routine business. There's a segment for recognition items. There's a segment for board comments, a segment for the superintendent's report, a segment for information items, one for upcoming agenda items, and the following changes have been made since we published the agenda to you. Item 9.1, the superintendent's report, will be updated during the meeting as is customary for regular meetings. Item 11.1, fiscal outlook 2018 to 22, was adjusted with an updated PowerPoint presentation that was uploaded prior to the start of this evening's meeting. Item 14.1, special meeting November 14 was updated with a date at which there will likely be a quorum of the board prior to the actual start of the Washington State School Directors Association Conference. The board may elect to change the order of business by a majority vote of the members. And please know this is not the point in the agenda to request items be removed from the consent agenda. In all other respects, the agenda is as we published it to you, and we ask your approval thereof.
Thank you. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as amended?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved by Director Lassane and seconded by Director Mitchell to approve the agenda as amended. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will move to the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The agenda is adopted. Now we are on to, I believe, the reason why we have a full boardroom this afternoon. We are section 5.0 recognition, and we have Deputy Superintendent Dr. Joyce Stewart to introduce our summer reading program.
I've always wanted to be taller, so here's my opportunity tonight. So here I go. So as you remember, 4 years ago, we launched our summer reading challenge. And after our first year, we had about 4,000 kids who participated. And then after our third year, we had 8,000. And this year, after our fourth year, we didn't quite get to 8,000. But remember, we had several of our libraries that were closed, but we were very grateful to our public libraries for letting our kids access books there. So anyway, we're celebrating again nearly 8,000 students participating in our summer reading program. And you're going to see behind me almost a dozen students, and they are representing the 8,000 students throughout our district who participated in the summer reading program. Some of them are here because they set a personal goal and they reached their personal goal. Some of them are here because they read hundreds of books, and some of them are here because they have hundreds of AR points. So again, they're here for many, many reasons, but most of all, I want you to remember they are here because they represent many students and their faces out in our schools. Before I get started tonight and have a principal or a teacher introduce them, I also want to thank, I don't know if Joanne Budewick's here. Joanne, are you here? Here is a person behind the scenes who really helps make all this happen. Diana Biggs, my assistant, and Joanne, they work very closely, and I didn't want to get started tonight without making sure we recognize Joanne because She, of course, is very humble and didn't want to come up here, but I said, I'm going to say your name anyway. And then also, we had some librarians in the audience who, from the very start, made sure that we launched this in the right way. And every single year, the librarians give us input on how we can make this better. So I know we have 2 librarians in the audience, and I'd like them to stand. And let's recognize them, too, because, again, they represent the voice of their colleagues. And we meet every spring, and we say, what can we do to make this program better? So I would like to start by asking Mr. Rhodes, he is the principal at Cedarwood, to come up and introduce our first student. The student and his or her family are going to come to the front, and then the families are going to sit down, but the students are going to stand right here, and then at the end they're going to come up and you're going to give them their certificates. So that's how we're going to do this tonight. So Mr. Rhodes, would you like to come up and introduce the first student?
Thanks, Dr. Stewart. Hello, board. Welcome to tonight. Efren Ahmad is our student from 2nd grade that I would like to introduce from the Summer Reading Challenge. Efren.
So Ahmad has read 303 books. 303 books. So I'm going to have him come up with his family because his mom told me a secret before he arrived. Shortly after he was born, just a few months when they took him to the toy store, he always chose books already then, a few months after he was born. So do you want to tell our board members why you think summer reading is important? Okay, come right up here.
I think summer reading is important because, like, when there's no school, summer reading was, like, the only thing to do. And I've learned a lot from the books that I have read. And my parents helped me get the books from Snow Library. And I'll continue reading with passion and dedication.
You have more to tell him? You're finished? Okay, let's clap one more time for him, all right? Now, you're going to come with me. They're going to come over here, and they're going to take really good care of you for a few minutes, all right? So you're going to stand right back here, look at the to make sure they remember what you said. Okay? So they support summer reading, so you're going to take good care of them for a while. So next, I'd like to invite Miss Yob and Miss O'Connor Weaver to come up and introduce their Hawthorne Hawk student.
Wow, and this is tall. Hello. I don't need it? No. Okay. I would like to introduce Arwa Al-Azadi. She's a 5th grader at Hawthorne, and she has a great message about reading.
My message is that reading is important because it opens up your imagination to a new world that you never knew was there. And that it gives some education for kids that haven't learned.
And what you need to know is that she read 66 books, 520 AR points. Next, I'd like to invite the librarian from Everett High School and literacy teacher Heather Hoffman to come to the front and introduce our Everett High School student.
I'd like to introduce Bella Leon, and she has read 39 books. And I've asked her since how many books she's really read, and she says too many to count.
And she's in 9th grade, and we're going to have her be an ambassador next year until she graduates.
Would you like to tell me anything about summer reading? Not tonight? Okay.
Not tonight.
All right, okay. Do you want to look at Miss Yutter?
Okay.
Give her a big smile. All right, so we're going to have Okay, next, Miss Overly. Here she is. Miss Overly, I'm going to have you introduce your Madison Husky. Want to come to the front?
Good evening. It is my pleasure to introduce Dahlia Asper. She is a 2nd grade student at Madison, and she read 102 books this year, and she is here tonight with Grandma and Grandpa, and they are living this so that her parents can see it because they're in North Dakota. So this is very exciting. Would you like to say something about, do you want her to? You can say whatever you want.
The reason why I read 102 books is because I love to read.
She loves to read. What better reason for reading do we need than that? Good job, Talia.
And next, Ms. Farias from View Ridge Elementary.
I am so excited to introduce to you a third grader from View Ridge. Her name's Mila Kosovich, and she was one of our top 2 readers for the whole school. Beat out some 5th graders, didn't you?
She's nervous. Sure. Do you want me? So this is what do you want me to do? All right. So Mila loves to read. She says summer reading is fun because I have a lot longer to read longer books. I've always met 100% of my summer reading goal. And this summer, she completed the entire Harry Potter series and many other wonderful books and did earn over 260 AR points. So very Can you say that one?
Where's the third one?
She really wants to win that.
She still hasn't won the Kindle Fire, but she's not giving up.
And next, Ms. Heater, principal of Penny Creek Elementary.
Good evening. I would love to introduce to you Miss Betty Cornelius Smock. And we were talking a little bit about her reading before we started today, and she was recommending to me a series called Maximum Ride. So she said it's a wonderful sci-fi series, so I'm looking forward to looking into that this evening, maybe checking out on Amazon. She read so many books. Remind me how many AR points, Betty?
444, but I don't actually know how many books I read. 35. I don't keep track.
Oh, 35. She doesn't keep track of how many books. 35 books, but 444 AR points. So I'd like to introduce to you Betty.
I think summer reading is important because you can read for hours and you will not be interrupted because it is summer and you don't have to take any math tests or you don't have to go off and finish that quiz. And summer reading is really important because you have lots of time and you are out of school and you still need to learn.
Yeah. And from Cascade High School, Lillian Chamberlain, and she's going to be introduced by her librarian, Amalia.
Good evening. I'd like to introduce a very quiet, unassuming freshman. Lillian Chamberlain came to us this September, and the numbers were rolling in. They were flying in fast and thick, and her name was always at the top. So, Lillian, congratulations. Thank you.
So I feel like summer reading was important to me because I had nothing to do, but it also opened up my eyes to giving me what I might want to be when I'm older. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
She read 34 books, 480 AR points. And from Evergreen Middle, I believe your principal's probably at conferences right now, so I'm going to introduce you. Nicole Pedrahita, I invite you up here with your family. And I just have to tell you, every single family when I called, it was hard for them to talk because they were choked up with tears. They were so excited to have their students recognized tonight, and you need to know that. So there was a lot of excitement this weekend when they got phone calls. So Nicole, you want to tell them, because you had read 19 books, 306 points, one of the highest middle school students. So go ahead. And she doesn't like to wear dresses, but she wore one tonight. It's a big deal.
So I kind of wrote a lot, so I'm sorry. Okay.
That's okay.
Let's face it, reality can sometimes be boring and unfavorable. I find that reading during the summer gives you that chance to enter a new world and escape from our reality. I often find myself relating more to the story's characters than people from real life. With different perspectives in stories, it's not all sad and dark. The tone could be much happier and humorous while still delivering a good message. And when it comes to writing stories in English class, I don't really struggle finding a starting point like others in class. I can take a certain incident or event from a book and incorporate it into a story or event, I'm sorry, I lost my place. I can take an incident or event from a book and incorporate it into a story of mine to give it variety and originality. For instance, my English teacher gave us creative prompts to choose from to create a story that would eventually be shared with the class. Some kids were having a hard time starting, but when we finally had to share, almost everyone picked the same prompt and even used a melancholy tone. I ultimately decided to try to make my story funny and turn the character's odd situation into one with humor and mild curiosity. I just didn't want my story to sound like all the others. I wanted the distinguishing satisfaction of having created something original. In other words, if you don't know what to do in a situation, you can at least count on characters' actions in stories to give you examples. Basically, reading can teach you how the world works, but only if you're willing to pay enough attention.
So we have a student who received a Kindle, and he was not able to make it this evening, so his teacher is going to talk to you about what his mom sent me this afternoon. She doesn't have her glasses, so she's hoping she's going to be able to read this. So I think we can bring him up, though. So
there he
was a
is.
Kindle winner, so talk about what it was like.
Yeah, this is Ryan Brockman. He's one of my first graders at Port Gardner, and we're so excited to participate in summer reading there and had more kids this year than ever do that, too. And Ryan sent us this message that he wanted me to tell you that his favorite part of the summer reading was going to the library, reading all the books I want. And if you could hear him speak with his cute first grade voice, it'd be awesome. I really like all the dog books. He learned a lot about dogs this summer, says. He loves his Kindle. We've already added over 30 books onto it, including a new Dog Man title he hasn't read yet. It's a surprise. Thanks again, and I'm sorry we can't make it tonight. And I had to show this up. He came in because he's a first grader, so he was keeping track of minutes, not number of books. And he filled up the whole first page. And then he also was doing the Everett Public Library program, and he filled up most of the second page. And she showed me a picture when she came in for fall conferences of his wall in his bedroom, and it was covered with Post-it notes that went far beyond what these were. Of every time he finished a book, he wrote the name on a Post-it and stuck it on his wall. And we gave him credit for 3,780 minutes, but I know he did way more than that. So thank you for letting me share for him.
So thanks, Celeste Johnson, for being here. And then finally, students, I was thinking about what kind of a celebrity I would have invited tonight, and it would have been Dr. Seuss, but he passed away several years ago. But I think this is the message he would have given to all of you, and that is congratulations, today is your day. So let's all celebrate for them. So now we're going to have you come up to the front with our board members. They're going to give you your certificate. And then parents, we're really big into great moments make out of small moments. So we're going to ask you to use this time to take pictures of your children. So let's have you come to the front.
We'll have them squished together once they get them.
Yeah.
It's cursive.
Sorry, people. Phone's gonna be going. Sorry.
No, go on. Come on now.
All are in the back? Of the kids? Yeah. Right. And then you guys move this way. Is this just kids? Let's take this first, do kids. Okay. Here you go, everybody.
Go where you need it. Around you.
You get it, Grandpa?
Yep.
Okay,
It's good. Here we go.
Make sure that she brings that certificate to
Joyce. Over here. Please. There we go. Very good. Congratulations.
thank you all for coming. Very good. Yes. Thank you, Gary, for making a big deal out of this. Yes, I'm having Mike help me because it's heavy.
Kelly Shepherd. She's in the orange over there.
Bless you. This is not always doom and gloom.
Bless you.
It's amazing, but you're right, these are more fun than most.
How many books? 500.
Oh, yeah, I will. 26 minutes.
I'll still announce it though. Yeah. Okay, we're going to go ahead and continue with the meeting. We are now on section 6.0, public comments, and I believe tonight we have no public comments, so we will move on to section 7.0, the consent agenda. Dr. Cohn, please introduce tonight's consent agenda.
The board's consent agenda includes repetitive business items. Examples of this type of item include meeting minutes, personnel actions, expense vouchers, surplus lists, gifts and grants, and recurring contracts. Sometimes the consent agenda will include, as my teleprompter just went, 4 pages forward. What can I tell you? Sometimes the consent agenda will include items that occur less frequently, but that are of a routine business nature. The less frequently occurring consent agenda items are usually reviewed by the board in its Friday report 1 or more weeks before the board meeting when those items are scheduled to appear on the consent agenda. This gives directors time to ask staff questions about those items or to consider a discussion about the policy implications of a particular item. If a consent agenda item is removed by the concurrence of 2 directors, that item is placed in new business, and the remaining items are automatically renumbered. The board votes on the consent agenda by a single motion. By definition, the consent agenda is not debatable. In the case of this consent agenda, the superintendent's office received one inquiry regarding expenditures for safety and security upgrades. Therefore, the consent agenda is presented as published, and we ask your approval thereof.
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It has been moved by Director Mitchell and seconded by Director Lassane. Would any directors like to remove an item from the consent agenda and place it in new business section of the agenda? Hearing no requests, we'll move to the vote. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, no. The motion carries. We are now on to section 8.0 board comments. This is a time where directors and student representatives have an opportunity to share information or comments as they relate to the district. And tonight I'm going to fan out just to do something different and start with Director Mitchell.
Okay, Joyce isn't, oh, you are here. You know this is always my favorite night and my favorite thing we do. And this completely filled my heart tonight, so thank you. And I cannot challenge the kids in numbers or books or AR points, but I did read two particularly good books this summer, Lilac Girls about the Holocaust and the Polish Rabbits. It's awful. And then Dope Sick about the opioid epidemic. And I am pleased to see that the county is doing a lot of in-services and different things for that, but just how easy it is for people to become addicted. And at my class reunion this past weekend, a classmate at 48 years old just died of an opioid overdose. And so it is, it's around all of us. And so it's just sort of, it's just in our community. But I'm glad to see all of these kids here tonight. And I concur what an outstanding right we have in this country to vote. And so it'll be fun to see how everything comes in tonight. So thank you.
Thank you. Student Representative Pollock, do you have anything?
Just following everything that's happened tonight. It's been so wonderful having a room full of just smiling faces, seeing people happy to read. I have a lot of friends that hate it as much as they could, and I don't understand because it's always been a passion to just take in as much information as I could. So if we're talking about summer reading, I was able to finish my Edgar Allan Poe's Complete Tales and Works, which was the last day of school, but then I went over it again during the summer and I started Dostoevsky's works, which were amazing. So I'm just glad that being in school as a kid, I was motivated to read, and my teachers would inspire me and try to guide me to a reading set of mind, because it's really helped the way I go through the world today. It really taught me a lot. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Dr. Andrews?
I don't have any comments, thanks.
Dr. Lassane?
I don't have any comments, thank you very much.
Okay, takes us to Director Nankar.
I did have a couple. I think I saw a post, or probably might have been in Dr. Cohn's Friday report about maybe even a month ago. And I sort of looked at it and let it go. But then over the course of a couple of weeks, perhaps it might have been, in fact, last week, in neighboring cities, Mill Creek, we serve, but then even in Mukilteo, I shouldn't have actually named the cities, but there have been cases of where the cities have mismanaged funds and stuff like that. So on a post that we had for the Everett School District that said financial award for 31 years in a row, I thought that was amazing in the backdrop of things that are happening just around us.
Mm-hmm.
So, and especially that, given that it's for 31 years, that's something really to be proud of, yeah. And then the other thing I had was, I also had the opportunity to read Dr. Cohn's op-ed at the Mill Creek Beacon. And I think while this has given you extra work, I think it's valuable, very useful, and it's a great tool for not only educating the public, but also highlighting the achievements that the school district's done, and also in case of if the opportunities or issues that are up and that might be happening, then I think that's a great area to educate the public. So that's how I thought. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. I've appreciated those as well too. Yeah. I just have a couple items. First, I was able to participate in the new director orientation to onboard our newest director, and I recall almost 5 years ago going through that myself and how overwhelming it can feel at the moment, and yet it all sort of starts to seep in eventually. But for myself personally, what a great reminder and a review that session was, to be able to go back over things, because when you do it initially, it's a different context than when you have an opportunity once you've settled in a little bit. So hopefully you'll have an opportunity to review again some future point. I had coffee with State Representative June Robinson to share some details about our legislative agenda. It's going to be very interesting in the coming months as legislators head back to Olympia in January to understand, and Mr. Moore is going to give us a good backdrop for that later this evening. And then last night, this is the most important, I was attended the Everett High annual Buff Puff competition, which is Buff Puff. It's where the boys play volleyball and the girls play football. And it's the seniors versus the juniors. And I happen to have a junior at Everett High this year, so he was on the team. And surprisingly, actually a pretty good volleyball player for all the fact I've never seen him ever play volleyball in his life before. He probably did that in PE class. But it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of energy. It's the kind of event that you love to attend because everybody's out for the evening to have a good time. And unfortunately, and if you talk to my son, due to some technicalities that were out of their control, the juniors did lose to the seniors. But it was a close game, and it was a nail biter down to the final second. So that was a lot of fun. So with that. And I know that was important district information that we need to share. With that, we turn it over to Dr. Cohn for the superintendent's report.
All right, thank you very much. I would like to point out the cover slide this evening is very meaningful. That's a big smile, that's a big book, and somebody's on fire there, I think, which says something about our reading program. Dr. Stewart, I want to thank you so much for all the work that you've done over the past several years getting this program up and running and continuing to gather community support for it and boost kids. Yeah, it is kind of fun, yes. It's a very large book, right? So thank you very much, and I wanted to honor the honorees again this evening with a little bit of a pic that depicts that fun that kids are engaged in when they're reading. Several of the quotes that I think we were provided about this summer's reading was very valuable. I'm going to review that in tonight's report, and I think what I'll do is jump right in here. The district continues to work with some community partners to put books in the hands of students and to help students build reading skills. The purpose also of this summer reading program is to prevent learning loss and to help prepare for a successful school year. There have been many changes in education over time, but the importance of reading and summer reading now remains constant. The collage that we have on this particular slide illustrates the enthusiasm of district students for preparing, participating, and celebrating their summer reading program achievements. An independent bookstore in Mill Creek regularly partners with area schools to bring in famous authors. This year, several of us, Dr. Stewart and I in particular, had the pleasure of attending gatherings this gathering was at Heatherwood. There was also one at Gateway Middle Schools. The schools were fortunate, with the support of the Mill Creek partner, to host New York Times best-selling award-winning author Sharon Draper. That is a picture of Sharon Draper right in the middle of the slide. She's reading to the students. She had a number of students come down. She's a very proud former middle school teacher. And I'll tell you what, to watch her work a crowd of 1,000 Heatherwood students in the gym was an absolute delight. And I have to say thank you to her for coming and rewarding the youngsters who participated and honoring all of their work. Pictured standing outside her home. Now, if you go to the left, your left, and she's in a little red top and a white. It looks like white shorts. Pictured here, standing outside her home, is a third grade Cedarwood Elementary student who waited and watched for hours for her report card to arrive in the mail. According to Mom, who snapped the photo and sent it to us, the little one didn't care about the progress report. She was looking for the summer reading brochure. So I want to thank our sponsors, the Everett Public Library, Snow Isle Libraries, the YMCA of Everett, our Everett Public Schools Foundation, and our staff and families for supporting an outstanding set of results in summer reading. 7,730 students immersed themselves in the magic of reading. 2,100 of these students earned the reward of having their name published. Let me do that again. 2,100 students earned the reward of having their name published in the Daily Herald on November 8. And I want to thank the Daily Herald for that support as well. This is the third year that they've done that, fourth year that they've done that. Was four fingers, right? The fourth year that they've done that. We very much appreciate that, and we'll send them a little note of thanks as well. We have some more good news. We want to congratulate Jackson High School's girls soccer team on their 6th straight Wesco 4A championship. Gabriela Franco scored her first goal of the season to help the Timberwolves beat Lake Stevens 3-0. The Jackson High School boys cross country team is also a Wesco champion. Joe Skoog was the individual Wesco champion and actually won the whole race 2A, 3A, 4A. The Jackson High School girls swim and dive team won the 4A district title this past weekend at the Snohomish Aquatic Center. 5 of the girls will represent Jackson at the state competition in individual events. The team also qualified for state in all 3 of the relays, 200 medley, 200 free, and 400 free. We're very proud of our Jackson athletes. Congratulations to the Cascade High School first robotics competition team 4512, also known as the Cascade Bear Bots, and their impressive day at the Girls' Generation event. They held first place and made it to the first Alliance competition for the playoff round and chose Jackson High School's team 2910, Jack in the Bot. So the teams have numbers and names, right? Okay. 2910, Jack in the Bot, for part of their alliance. In the final competition, they were eliminated by 3 first robotics teams from across Western Washington. We're very proud of and want to congratulate our Cascade and Jackson students for their tremendous competition in the first robotics activities. Last week, Everett High School seniors accomplished some important college work at the 3rd annual College Application Day event. FAFSA and WASFAs were started. Applications began, and the Naviance system was organized, and scholarships were researched. So kids were very much involved in that work at Everett High, as you can tell, in a variety of approaches to getting them ready for the next steps in their lives. We want to say a special thanks to college representatives from Eastern, from Central, from Gonzaga, from Grand Canyon, from Northern Arizona, and from the UW-Bothell. They provided hands-on assistance to our students and staff. We're thankful for Everett High School's library for hosting the event. We had a treat last week. Dr. Norman Webb facilitated an English language arts math coach cadre meeting here at the Community Resource Center. You can see Dr. Webb at the lectern in the picture. Dr. Webb developed the depth of knowledge chart model that the district captured in the poster that you see around our schools and that we've shared widely with teachers and students. Demands at the college level require students to have a strong conceptual understanding of mathematics and deep analytic facilities with language. Depth of knowledge is a language system that's been used to analyze the alignment of the content, complexity of curriculum standards, assessments, and instruction. Youngsters use this to understand the standards and the assessments in order to do well in demonstrating what they know and are able to do. And we're going to spend some time with Mr. Moore this evening, talking about the district's financial outlook, impacts on our budget, the cuts that we expect to have to make over the next few years. And we wanted to make sure that you recognize visually that we're not alone in this particular challenge. We captured some images from other school districts' websites and newspaper articles that basically share with you financial updates from a number of other school districts in Washington. It is clearly apparent that there are financial challenges in many local districts as news of significant cuts have begun to hit the popular press. We wanted to recognize the Whittier Elementary School PTA. The PTA donated $10,884 to the Wildcats to help pay for 5th grade students to attend Camp Colloqua. The camp is located in Stanwood and has served as an outdoor education resource for several years. So thank you to Whittier's PTA. Quick construction update. Elementary 18 is moving right along. Approximately 80% of the concrete's been poured on the first and second floors. Exterior and interior metal stud framing continues, and the exterior sheathing is well underway. Mechanical and electrical rough-in is in progress. Looking ahead to mid-November, the contractor is scheduled to begin installing the roofing underlayment, which begins the process to what Mr. Gunn calls dry in the building so that we can begin the work inside as well. Here's a quick summary of school visits during the month of October. The asterisk identify a number of visits to the same school, whether it was for on-time graduation meetings or school visits or football or breakfast with ASB officers or high school and beyond night. It was a busy month, and I'm delighted to have been able to spend time with hundreds of our students during the past month, and some really neat staff as well. Thank you all. That's my report for this evening, with 48 seconds left.
Excellent. I would say probably more like thousands of students, given all those school visits.
Okay.
Okay, we are going to move past strategic progress monitoring because we do not have a report this evening, which takes us to section 11.0, information and discussion. And tonight, Mr. Moore is going to give us a fiscal outlook for 2018 to 2022. And I also want to acknowledge, I know a few extra background slides were added to provide a little bit more level of detail. And I want you to be able to take your time and really explain the background. I think it's important for both public and a good review for directors and good new information for new directors to really
part of the
grasp,
orientation process.
Yes, the whole history and how we've ended up where we are today. So.
Thank you very much, and that's a perfect introduction. We did probably double the slides from agenda review, so wait on starting the timer. So the way this is structured is a look back in time on the milestones that McCleary has gone through. Some would say it's over, and from the court perspective, it is. So we want to kind of update you on what's left to do beyond what the actual court case asked of the legislature. We want to talk a little bit about, and when we mention these bills, substitute bill 6362, it's really the budget adoption for the legislature. So 6362 is the 2018 legislature's update to 2242, which occurred in 2017, knowing that on odd years we have a biennial budget and it's a significant undertaking and generally 105 days, but in recent years 2017, there were 3 extended sessions. So it didn't really, started in January, didn't get over till June. And then the even years, they do updates to it. And so 6362 is an update. We're going to update the long-range projection, and then we're going to talk about the legislative shortfalls, because part of our challenge in the future is getting the legislature to address and fix some of the problems they did in that significant shift that occurred back in 2017. And then we want to emphasize why early action from the legislature for many districts will avert the need to start the layoff process. So that's sort of the layout. So I'm going to start with the legislative milestones. Back in 2007, a consortium of individuals and a family named McCleary and the WEA and school districts and other associations filed the lawsuit. In 2009, the legislature, notice it's odd years where you see these big actions, they had adopted 2 bills, I think to appease the intent that we're going to fully fund K-12, and we're going to do it by 2018. And they set up a timeline, they set a roadmap, and then they began to embark on that roadmap. But nothing really went into action. They had a joint task force on education funding. They had a lot of task force recommendations that to them were unavoidable, so there was no action. So in 2012, the state formally ruled that the legislature, we call the legislature the state, had failed the constitutional provision to amply fund K-12 and gave them the deadline of 2018 to actually do what they said they were going to do back in 2009. So as we roll through the next 4 years, the state had created this commitment plan. We're gonna start ramping up, and these are the four broad areas that they're going to invest in: full day K3 class size, materials and supplies and operating costs. Because in those earlier bills, they had created a prototypical school model. Instead of before them just saying, here's a large sum of money for you to do everything you need to do, they actually went out and studied what it takes to run a school, and they surveyed all the districts. And we can argue that it's woefully light, but at that point in time, they created a structure. And for school districts, that was important because you could ensure accountability. If you say you're not providing enough funding for nurses, you can point at the model and say, look, there's 2 nurses in this entire district. So it was an accountability measure, and at the same time, it's not an allocation measure. So these moved forward at a steady rate, but the whole time, districts were saying, before you give us all this money, you have to address compensation. In other words, if you give us funding for K3 class size, then we're not going to be able to fund the local levy part because you're overcoming our levy. Well, about the same time, the legislature also, as they cut funding, let us have a 28% levy instead of a 24% levy. So as we walk through that period of time, that levy was supposed to end. The 4% was going to drop off at 2018. So we began to say, we urge the legislature, you got to fully fund compensation before you cut our levy. Otherwise, we won't be able to afford this. So this was what we called the levy cliff. We have a different kind of levy cliff. We have a levy wall to climb that's before us. So as we went through time, the 2017 legislature did adopt 2242. It forced a levy swap. And as we've talked about that, instead of a levy cliff, what they did is they increased state taxes and they lowered our ability at the local level to collect levies. And in many districts like Everett, they cut it too low. They eliminated what was a salary allocation model, which was a standard grid across the state that you had to show compliance to, and the staff mix factor, which also allowed us to be, if you had teachers with more years of experience, you got more funding based upon what they had done in their longevity. So a lot of things happened in that legislative session, some good, some bad. Through the levy swap, the good thing is some of the rural districts, there was a bit of a Robin Hood effect. So their property taxes went down for state schools, and in larger cost centers or AV districts like Seattle and Bellevue, their property taxes went up. But to the homeowner, it was a slight increase compared to what others felt because they have the huge commercial tax base. They just enjoy paying less in taxes because of all the commercial assets they have. So a lot of things happened, and what they did in order to meet that the demand from the Supreme Court is they decided, we're going to give you your salary money, but we're going to do it over 2 years. First in 1819, the other half in 1920. And we're also, because we're not through this transition, we're going to cap you at 3.1% on all salaries. We don't want any monkey business. You hold to that, and we'll get off we'll increase the state funding, and we'll decrease the levy, and that'll all occur. In November, the Supreme Court said that wasn't good enough. We said 2018, you're still in contempt. So when they did the levy swap, the challenge is that they counted all the new money they gave us. When you think back to that diagram, they were giving us money for full-day kindergarten, for K-3 class size, and when they give us some money, you have to go out and hire the teacher. And generally, it's not a break even. You're using some levy dollars because they hadn't increased our local support or state support for those salaries yet. So in other words, they were counting every dollar they gave us when they cut the levies. When in fact, as you can see in 2018, the money for COLAs doesn't help us offset the levy. It goes to the staff. The money for additional K-3 class size teachers go to pay for the teachers and the classroom materials. The money for special education was really salaries too. And the money for career and technical education allowed us to spend money on STEM and related services or learning assistant program or English language learners. But you can't take that and spend that on other things. So all of that money didn't help us offset the levy. Yet they cut the levy. So they made some adjustments, but this is House and Senate staff in that period of time. They didn't consult OSPI, and all this occurred in the last couple of days of that session. So that's kind of the nexus of the problem, is when they made their calculations. And then they came up with this swap idea, which really hadn't been discussed all season. Probably this is the most easiest way to demonstrate it, that under the new formula, where either it's based upon your property values or it's based upon the number of students, Everett gets capped at about $1,472 per student, because our $1.50 property value, our values are lower than Bellevue. Bellevue can collect $2,500 a student. Same number of students, different district, 20 million more in the same labor market. So we have issues with this, but know that this levy inequity and this problem doesn't occur for every district. Seattle needs even more than that, and you're seeing them talk about $4,000 per student. But right now we're capped at $1,500, and you'll see that's a part of our challenge going outward. They also created regionalization, and for districts in North King, South Snohomish, it became a structural deficit. Because when they looked at where the cost centers are, we've traditionally had historically a higher labor market in this area. So rather than planing everybody off, this diagram shows more or less a wedding cake. The lightest shading means you get the standard allocation. As you start phasing into the green, it steps on the wedding cake that are 6% more, 12% more, and 18% more. But for us in this region up here, they allowed us to get another 6% at 24%. And so what that means is it makes resources available for collective bargaining that will go away over time, because they're phasing it out over 3 years. And what that does for us, because we have reserve, this is the diagram we looked at after that 17th session. And this doesn't take into account our reserves, because we've done a good job of saving up our bank account to accommodate this. From this perspective, we looked at this and say we can cover the 1.4 million deficit, because this is taking all their funding, looking at what we were doing at that point in time that isn't covered, and that's how many levy dollars we needed to accomplish that. So going forward, you can see that we were good for a couple of years and probably can cover 2021. In fact, it was this layout that we showed I think it's the following one, that we showed our SLT. And the bottom line was, when they looked at it, in order for us to guard against those resources, we were going to need to keep our reserves high and try to sustain it as long as we can until we can get legislative action. So go forward a year, and the legislature is listening to two things. One is they're under contempt of the court, and the second thing, districts are saying, fix the levy, give us more special education funding, the same requests that we've demonstrated them for many years. And what they did is they appeased the court. They basically accelerated that second year and gave us all the money up front, but kept the 3.1% cap in place. It's stated in the laws to the extent that everybody moving forward was looking at this, great, we're going to have significantly high reserves, and then we're going to have to pan that out over time. They didn't fix the levy formula, I will say, except for Seattle. They tweaked it, so Seattle was below 2,500, they could get there, but they didn't, and they didn't do what we asked them to do, which is define basic education, provide funding for special education, et cetera, et cetera. So what they had done is appease the set that the court had adopted under those bills back earlier, and they said, you've met our request. We asked you to do what you said you're going to do. And they had no plan for special education. So the court more or less said, you know, that's for yours to address, but you've satisfied the court. Going forward, we, as I mentioned before, I think I've covered what this slide covers, but the challenges we had, and I think it was a big contributor to the failure of the last bond, is they did the levy swap, but they went ahead and enacted their increase of 80 cents, which really was $1, on all property owners before we cut our levy. And that created the impression with our public that we have all these new taxes, look how much we're paying for schools, whereas in 19, that school contribution will drop. We're going from a 61 million levy that we could have collected to about a 30 million. So the impression is with our community is, wow, our taxes went up, schools are amply funded, McCleary's over. We just tested that last night with the Fiscal Advisory Council, and that's the perception that exists. But why did they drop it by 30 cents here for 1 year? Could it have been an election year? Because the following year it goes back up 30 cents. So in this election, they were able to say we lowered our state property tax. So I'm not being cynical, but one could. Following that same picture now changes to where, wow, 17.2 million. These diagrams assume a standard level of commitment to salaries. So over time, 3.5% generally is what happens in local bargaining and benefits and the things that are cost. So here we're looking at a lot of reserves, and we still have that outgoing problem because the bottom row shows you how that 24% declines over time and it goes down to 18%. Plus, we're capped with a levy that doesn't increase as it had in the past. It has a lower inflation lid. And we're also in a volatile situation because if our AV drops in a recession, then guess what? Our levy goes down too. So we're looking at, and that in particular is something that the court ordered was a sustainable, reliable source of revenue. And that source of revenue is volatile if you're in that bracket between 2,500, because the minute state resources go down and AVs go down, the state's going to cut us and our levy's going to drop. We're going to get a double impact. These are the message we're trying to resonate to correct the formula, create equity going forward. So at that point in time, we're now in the present state. That document was about May. So now let's talk about what happened between May and now. And that's the interpretation of that 2018 bill. We put together and developed a preliminary budget forecast, and I'm showing this red arrow down at the bottom because Dr. Cohn asked me to. But really, I'm highlighting, that's kind of a joke, but I'm highlighting where we thought our fund balance reserves would be. Now, this is going to look better than the one before because we've built up a 10% fund balance. So this equates to what we showed the state as our 4-year budget. So our stewardship in building up the overall reserves allows us to buffer against what can happen. And at this point in time, this is all based upon understanding that there's a 3.1% cap. We talked to all of our classified groups. We were only open with the EEA. I worked with our transportation partners and said it's 3.1. We're all subject to it. And so you can see that our reserves went up significantly as a result of that. Following that, when we talked with our classified groups, technically our groups, with our other groups, it's around a 2% or COLA, the greater of, if the state provides a COLA. Well, this year, it technically wasn't a COLA. So as I mentioned, we agreed to 3.1%. I think I've already covered the contents of this slide, quite frankly. It was about that time, and we heard it in the bargaining where we honor confidentiality, that the WA had a different opinion of the 3.1% cap, that actually some of the mechanisms that were passed in that last bill for steps, meaning the annual increases you get, or added hours or other things, and most of all, the bill also kept in responsibility incentive. In other words, in brevity, that they claimed that the cap didn't exist. There was really no court, there was no place to go to weigh in. Some of the districts asked the Public Employee Relations Commission, or PERC, to look at this and tell us, does it exist or doesn't it? They denied the matter because you need all participants to be involved, and the WA at that time chose not to. So in July and early August, school districts began to agree to larger salary increases. And quite frankly, our legislatures in the bottom bullets stood in a video with the WA and said this resources is intended for staff. It's intended to be, and all staff, not specifically teachers, but generally it's something we intend to be spent on staff. I think the interpretation was, don't go buy stuff, don't go build stuff, don't go buy property. These are for salaries. And we're saying, yes, we agree, but you have to account for where you're lowering our levy, because those were paying for salaries and this money's going to supersede it. So we're again in this position of a lower levy and fading out of state funding. And so moving forward, the market rate around us, clearly beginning in, I think, in Bellevue and Lake Washington and Edmonds, these agreements are going into place. And then our state superintendent issued that statement, which did confirm from the OSPI's perspective that the 3.1% did not exist. So at that point in time, when we go through each fiscal year at our budget, and as a result of McCleary, which is interesting, I think there was an article about another district that put a four-year forecast out, and that's unheard of, where it's been status quo on something we've done here for years. This one in particular, you can see how the complexion changes. And whenever one of those numbers is below 5%, or we say we need 6% to get 5, like you see in the second year of 2.2, it means that you need to plan to make cuts so that you can increase that number up to that 6% in our commitment to you as a board and to our community. So at that point in time, we took into account, and we hadn't finalized the agreement, but because of the state law of having adopted by August 31st, we had to take action and we had to make decisions, and we created what we think is the capacity to absorb that. We still may, depending on what we do with our other employees, the rest of us, we may have to do a budget extension, only because it limits our appropriation. But at this point in time, we accounted for the agreement. So that's why you'll see different lines when we get to the chart here in a minute. As you've seen, districts agreed anywhere from 10 to 20%, depending upon the area in which they're in. We were at 15.5 with 2.1 the following year, which includes IPD, and it's about 2%. And it is an increase of about $20 million in compensation, as you can see, nearly 24 over the 2-year period. The state provided what people call fence posts. It's a minimum and a maximum pay. You can see that we're above the minimum annual pay by about $450, and we're below the maximum by about $4,800. It's important to note that in many of the agreements, you'll find that that lower cap, that a lot of districts invested more in that area, whereas in our agreement, it honors some of our more experienced educators. So we have the number one top post, but we have probably one of the lower bottom posts for our area. So given that, our long-range projection going forward, I just want to document the assumptions are in it. And it incorporates, at this point in time, we've updated for the actual agreement, the 2-year agreement, and we're assuming for all groups in years 3 and 4 that it's just implicit price deflator, that it's 2% is the projection. We're not assuming in those out years some new bargaining number. We're assuming status quo because we don't know anything more than that. We also, what do I say here? I think I've covered that, 3.1. It assumes, because I think I didn't mention, in the statutes, and Superintendent Reichtel actually specifically said there's 3 types of employees. There's certificated staff, which is teachers. There's certificated administrators, which is generally principals, or people who are administrators like our colleagues to the right that have a teaching certificate. And then there's classified administrators, which is generally us, the food service workers, everybody else, bus drivers, custodians, they're classified. And the statute basically said that the 3.1 does not exist for classified staff, and it does not exist for teachers, but it does exist for principals. It's a flaw. It's what occurred. It's in statute. And at that point in time, this projection does include an unstated and undetermined increase for classified staff, but it does not include additional resources for that certificated group of individuals. So it also does not include, because we're working and trying to understand how this transition to the state healthcare plan, making sure that it's balanced. And so it does not include that either. It includes elementary 18, and it doesn't count on any other state funding. So when you look at this and understand, a few months ago we were talking about $11.5 million for next year. We've had a better ending fund balance. These are just a number of positives that happened to us. Higher AV, the one-time increase in transportation revenue. So for districts that have contract busing like Everett, they didn't know quite what to do. They applied a salary increase for districts that hire their own buses, so they gave us an increase in our contract, and we have not negotiated for next year. So we have a one-time surplus of transportation dollars. But what this equates to is that $11.5 million cut is lowered to next year for 6.5, which I think we agree sounds a lot better. It's in the range of, we've doing some mapping on it being accomplishable. But the real problem is, again, going forward with regionalization, with the phase out of all that, then the following years, I think it's another 11.5 million, and over a 3-year span, if they don't affect either A, give us more funding, B, fix a levy, C, stop the phase out of regionalization, that grows to 23 million over the next several years. So we're always looking 4 years ahead and how we communicate that going forward. And so this top blue line goes back to that first snapshot that we took in July when we had the preliminary budget. The yellow was in August before we settled the agreement, and the blue is today. So that 4% fund balance to bring it up to 6% is about $6.5 million, and on a $330 million budget, it's about 2% that we need to cut, and then that number grows over time. That's sort of a snapshot of where we are looking forward. So what can help us? The state recognizing how far they're underfunding special education. The state recognizing or looking at the reliance upon local levies. In other words, under this model, they were felt unconstitutional for over-reliance on local funding. Well, as we go forward in 1920, our levies down, our salaries are set for all groups, and we have the full regionalization factor. It certainly is a less dependency, but if they don't maintain the 24% or find another way, by the time we get to 2023, you're starting to see a similar unconstitutional dependency on local levies, which is what some of the vocal opponents are of allowing levies to be increased. We're not suggesting that the levies be significantly increased. We're saying if you get us to where what you allow Bellevue to collect, if you recognize when you phase out staffing funds, it has to go to the levy, and we can't do anything about this. Bring all waters up and maintain us where we're at. And so there's simple things that we can demonstrate to them. This is what the prototypical school model provides for health services, student safety, building security, and resource officers. The dark orange is what we spend. The yellow and the shorter blocks are obviously how we're funded. So there's a lot of things that can help us going forward, and we'll continue to do what we've always done. This might make you crazy, but it's really important to understand, and I'll use a cursor, and I'm not sure how I can direct you. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, good. I have never tested that before. Really where we start backing up what must be done is right here, May 15th, understanding that the session's going to start January 7th. It's going to go to April 21st. And oftentimes they save the answers we need to know until that last moment in time, because it's a bargaining chip between House and Senate and D's and R's. But we have a May 15th deadline, and we won't know till the 21st, because if they don't conclude on the 21st, that jumps out a month. But we have to be prepared for that. And there's a April 9th board meeting. In order for us to plan layoffs, should they be necessary, should we don't have enough retirements, resignations, or a more favorable outlook, we're going to have to develop a reduced educational program. And a reduced educational program is based upon some statutes in the 70s. It's a way of the board formally saying, here's what we're going to cut specifically. And that needs to be developed. In order to develop a reduced educational program back here, we have to engage a fiscal advisory council. We have to engage our leadership team. We have to. We have a study session with you in March. We need to identify what that might be. But while we're waiting to identify if we have enough cuts, we can't follow our strategy of early hiring. We can't go out and try to pick the best, because if you go out and hire them, you're giving them a continuing contract. And under today's rules, if we do have to lay off, they're safe, and somebody we just hired last year will have to be laid off. And that's why we're working so hard on language with with the EEA that allows us to look at programs rather than just who was here last. So all of that sort of falls into place. And to the extent we need to engage the public, we're analyzing which way will this 6.5 million go, because it can get better and it can get worse. And so each point in time, why we want to be as factual and as complete as possible, there's a lot up in the air that we need to speculate. The key is to understand is that we even talked about the messages today with Kathy, and it's like we don't know for sure we'll have to lay off, but we know we need to be prepared to lay off, and we need to understand this, and we need our legislature to understand that really, if you don't make a fix, and that's what the big arrow is at the bottom, if you don't come up with a quick fix, at least on the levy, because what they could do is what they did in 2017, they could say, look, we're going to say everybody can collect $2,500, you're guaranteed that as a floor, and then we're going to fix the formula as we go through time. We don't know if they will, but that's what we're asking them to do, because once they do that, we're in a better fiscal situation. We can collect. And here's what's important, that $1.50, it's well below what our voters said they want to support us at. They approved a levy that's up around $23.50 per student, and it steps up because we designed it to step up as regionalization phased out. So all we need, the most significant action we need, is something early to stop us from going through a process where we could be the administrators that called wolf. We have a crisis and then boom, it's fixed. So we're trying to manage those messages going forward. So I think I went the long road, and hopefully that was really helpful.
Thank you. Still a lot of information to digest and process. Many of us have seen it before, fortunately. Directors, do you have questions, or student representative questions or comments for Mr. Moore? Go ahead.
Looking at your slide that says updated long-range projection, current projection without levy fix. But go back to that one.
This.
I don't have the page number.
This one?
Yes, this is the correct one. Looking at the light blue, that is what you're estimating as the revised projection as of today.
Correct. The last bit of information that was most helpful was closing the October month expenditures and looking at 2 years of expenditure, 2 months on a 12-month is challenging. And we saw, that's why I put a few anomalies in there. We saw salaries be lower than what we would expect. And there's a number of things we're suspecting. We'll get our S275 in the next month filed, so we can look at it with a more definitive mix factor.
Okay.
But we are making assumptions that we're not going to be as favorable on salaries as the current projection. So those are the kind of things that can change. So yes, this is as of today based upon the best information we have.
It is better than what we had seen previously with the budget forecast, but it then parallels that same graph. If you look at it, it's
Right.
still a parallel projection out the 4 years that the state has asked us to provide a budget forecast for.
Yeah, what really happened is we're looking at a better outlook this year, and we ended up a little bit better at the end of last year, and then that transportation funding came in. So it really raises 18-19 ending fund balance, which helps everything else improve going forward.
It does. It does give us
Yeah.
that little bit of leg, but if you look at 1920, you know, and then the 21 and 22, it's not a picture perfect
No,
forecast.
most fiscal people like to see the lines going up, so I would agree.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
Other directors or?
Actually,
Great.
I actually have a couple, sorry.
That's okay.
Not so fast.
I'm kind of waiting on Director Andrews too. She's kind of a,
I am, so just to frame it for people who don't understand, our total budget is about
30 million.
million. And so when we're looking at 5?
Yes.
That's roughly 2% of our total budget. Okay. I just kind of wanted to frame that. And then, you know, I think really what your presentation does is makes you realize how complex all of this is and how many moving parts there are to this. It's not just about teacher salaries, and it's not just about an immediate levy fix, although that would provide more quick relief to the district. But there's a lot of different things that are still floating out there that we haven't locked down. I will say I'm glad the district took a very conservative approach with their fund balance early on, because that has definitely helped us. But I had a question about the teacher salary. So you had published several months ago, after the contract with the EEA was signed, a percentage increase by the different salaries based on the chart.
I'm sorry.
So the increases to the teacher salaries.
Right.
And so the percentages are, I think what I'm trying to clarify is that there was not a 15.5% increase to all teacher salaries.
No.
So it was spread out.
Correct.
And some got more and some got less. Who determined that? How do you, did
Let me
that go
explain
about?
that by going back in a little bit of time, too. Unlike most districts in the state, we have our own salary schedule. Because we were grandfathered with a little more state resources, think of it as being steeper. So they are able to take and you have to match the exact state funding. It's called salary compliance. So we had to look, everybody that's on our salary schedule, and match the exact same dollar if we put everybody on the state salary schedule. So we had a unique salary schedule, and then things happened over time. There was a point in time where they gave a COLA, but only to new teachers, right? Only for years 1 through 6. And I don't think many of you, other than Carol, was on the board at that time. And so when we bargained, they said, no, we're going to make it so it's 6% for everybody. So in the lower teachers, that state salary schedule started moving up. The long and short is we had more channels, that our salary schedule is much different than the state. So it almost, you could say, it kind of undulates. I think that the EEA first came to that. We were trying to balance and create a systematic way of having a salary schedule. There was no metric either. So say you went from this lane to this lane. It wasn't like every lane's a 2% increase and this you got this increase. It was all different. And so when they poured from their perspective and increased the salaries to the extent, they led the way of saying, we're going to have a standard cell increase for experience and for education. So I would say it was their idea, and in early stages when we were looking at a 3.1, it wasn't really possible because some people would literally lose. So you're right, there are people on this schedule that get 21%, there's people that get 8%, and it's all based upon the difference between the current and the next. And that happens for 1 year. So that is exactly right, that it's an average of 15.5%.
Is that going to be the same for the following 1 year where we were looking at 2.9% or 2.1% or?
Well, it simplifies our work going forward because once they reset it, then the 2.1 is just applied to everybody and it's standard. So it's really scalable is what you would call it. It's scalable and it wasn't before. So I think that's
good history. I did not understand because I look at the increase in the starting salary and how it compares to other districts around us. And I frankly was disappointed to see it so low because that's what attracts new talent. And
well, that was part of the problem too. If you started raising that up, then the top of it dipped down and your more experienced educators would get 6%. Realize that some of the newest educators that there are certain individuals, the biggest winners are those who chose not to get continuing education. And so they stay in those early instructional years and they move up in years. And so the way the state structured it and that floor, it actually helps some individuals. But they value what we valued, and that is to try to motivate educators to get continuing education going forward. I think Dr. Stewart would agree with that conversation.
Do we have something in writing that says, as far as experience level, what percentage did receive what? You know, out of that 15%? Do we have something?
We sent that to you.
that was my question
Very
initially.
detailed?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have that.
Okay.
Okay, I think that was my only question. Any further questions? Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
No?
I did have a question, although I'm still trying to formulate my question. But it has to do with increases in assessed value and what are the assumptions regarding assessed value? And how would that affect the timing of the legislative session? Like, do we know right now the 2019 values?
2019, that is an interesting question because at first OSPI was saying, looking at it saying, we won't know. When your assessed values are always based upon, the 19 tax increases are based upon what happens in 18.
Right.
And that's unknown until January when the assessors finalize it. So OSPI started down the road of, well, then we'll use 17. And for Everett, in my communications to them, for those of us between $1,500 and $2,500 per student, that's a $4 million difference. And I think I communicated that to you. A little bit of that is built into our conservative levy assessments before. So right now, they said, okay, for those districts in that, we're going to give the legislature instructions that once the AV is determined in January, that will set your $1.50 assessed value. So between now and then, if it appreciates more than what we originally just saw in September, it benefits us. But we averted another potential hit by making sure that that happened. But keep in mind, we're always like a year behind. So we're talking about 19. So when we looked at our budget that you adopted in August, I'm going to send out a Friday report on Friday that will say that we're going to come back like we did with the debt service fund, and we're going to make an assumption that AV is going to grow more than what we put in the budget. We put in the budget what we think it's going to be, but we want to make sure we don't miss anything. So we're going to have a resolution that will bump that up. it won't affect, it'll be what it'll be, but we don't want to be trapped by the budget resolution. So you're right, even if the legislature does make a fix in January, the soonest we could, is 2020 when we would start to see that benefit. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
And do you have any opinions about levy funding being based on assessed value of homes that go up and down over time?
Yeah.
I think, as I mentioned before, if you want a stable source, either based upon the old model, which Superintendent Reichtel's looked at a little bit, kind of a combo, or based upon a dollars per student. And realizing it has to be high enough for those with our higher cost of living, and that leaves the rural districts a little bit behind. So they want a little bit more LEA to keep them up with us. Right. But we're just, quite frankly, they botched it when it came to some districts like us.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Were you finished? I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. Section 12.0 is unfinished business, and tonight we have no unfinished business as well as no new business. So we come to upcoming agenda items. Dr. Cohen.
Yes, item 14.1 is your special meeting on November 14th, or at least it's scheduled to start on the 14th. It's your attendance at the Washington State School Directors Association Annual Conference. Director Nankar and myself are actually going to start a day early at boot camp for new directors. And then when you all come in, as soon as we get the third director, we'll get the meeting officially started. And of course, it adjourns from day to day, or recesses from day to day as the activity proceeds. We've also loaded into this particular item, this meeting, the superintendent's first trimester evaluation. You'll find it on the Saturday of the meeting. I've already published the meeting to you, although I haven't finished all the materials for the evaluation yet. My intent is to upload those by Thursday night. I will suggest you might want to bring your device or a device to the conference with you. We're going to go ahead and provide a projector for our meeting so that we can project using the device I'm bringing. 14.2 is your regular meeting scheduled November 20. That meeting looks like it will be fairly packed. You've got an integrated technology plan update. We reviewed it yesterday in cabinet, and I want to compliment Brian on the work that he's done to prepare a lot of really fine information for you on the progress of that one-to-one implementation and all the work that surrounds it. You have a first reading on policy 2410, which we have changed many, many times. It's our high school graduation requirements, and it's being changed for to reflect the latest statutory changes. Then you've got the fourth quarter financial report. You've got a Perkins grant, a program evaluation approval. You've got August financials, multiple contracts for special providers of support for our special education students who qualify. And then you have some changes to ASB constitutions, which I believe will be ready for you. Recall that you must approve an ASB constitution for it to be effective, and you must approve any amendments to ASB constitutions for them to be effective. In addition, we've got an Everett Medic One Foundation grant, which is a recurring grant on that agenda. And that is it for upcoming meetings that we've included in this particular agenda.
Thank you. Tonight, the board does have an executive session and a closed session. We will recess for approximately 10 minutes to reconvene at 6:10.
Sure.
To review the performance of a public employee and to discuss with the legal counsel representing the district matters relating to potential litigation to which the district is likely to become a party. The executive session is expected to last 30 minutes. No action will be taken following the executive session, and the board will conduct a closed session following the executive session to discuss parameters for collective bargaining. No action will be taken following the closed session.
You may shut off your devices if you like. We're going to do the signatures down here, which is why we've got a little bit more recess time. Remember, there are a few snacks over there.
I can be on it, I can't be there.
Kathy, real quick about talking points.
Okay.